I'm Chris Bussing. Welcome to my channel. It's committed to helping more people create a life of freedom and impact through success in tech sales and the pursuit of self-development. We've got an incredible guest today, Kyle Vouris, the CEO of Vouris, who has helped scale 60 B2B tech startups to grow to over 100 million in revenue collectively. And he's hired over 3,500 SDRs and account executives and helped turn them into pipeline generation machines. If you want to learn how to master sales development and also understand how to grow a sales team, especially at a startup, this conversation's for you. If you get value out of the video, of course, hit the like button and share this conversation with more people who could benefit from the message. Kyle, thanks so much for being here. How's your day going so far?
It's going great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Let's dig into it. I wanted to start off on a high note and understand what got you into sales and what do you love so much about this profession and this career path?
Yeah, well, I often say sales is the greatest career on earth. It has the lowest barrier to entry and like one of the highest ceilings. I often say you can get paid like a doctor, but you never have to cut anyone open.
I love that.
Yeah, I'll talk about my own journey. So I actually dropped out of college in 2013, I believe, somewhere around there, maybe 2012, 2013 to pursue a career in stand-up comedy. So I did stand-up for a little over 5 years. And while I was on that journey, I got a job selling gym memberships at a local gym in my neighborhood. And I did pretty well. My boss went to a company called Intuit. They make QuickBooks and TurboTax. So he referred me because I was a good gym salesperson, and they overlooked that I didn't have a college degree because I had some experience selling. And I knew somebody who worked there. I did a mock cold call, so they hired me as an SDR, making $30K a year. That was my salary. I think
things have changed since then.
72. Oh yeah, things have changed quite a bit. But anyway, so that was my first real start in sales. Was probably my SDR role at Intuit.
I noticed you were at Intuit, and then after that, you went to TalkDesk, which is like a unicorn SaaS company. And I noticed one of my current customers in my 9-to-5 implemented TalkDesk recently, and they love it. But I saw that you evolved into really enabling sales teams, leadership, sales development. And I want to dig into that, but it's really cool that you got into stand-up comedy. And you seem like a really funny guy. I love that you don't have to cut anyone open line. And I'm curious to, you get paid like a doctor, but don't have to cut anyone open. I'm curious to get your thoughts on some of the funniest aspects of sales. Don't you think it can be kind of ridiculous? You're making cold calls, doing things. So what are the funniest aspects of sales to you?
Definitely the people. Like, you just get to work with characters. And that's always been a lot of fun. Like, it's a unique culture. It's a unique part of an organization. And I probably, because of the reason that it has such a low barrier to entry, anyone can be a salesperson, that it attracts the strange, which I happen to love. One of the philosophies I have when hiring is to try to hire characters, people who are a little strange, a little goofy. And that's what I love about it. So I love being around those people. There's something special about a sales team where everyone's so different, has their own little quirks, and they're still able to get along and kind of march towards a common goal. So that's probably the funniest aspect. Of course, it can be hilarious when you're cold calling. You have to interact with people who don't like getting cold called and stuff like that. But just the people make it really fun.
Do you know Dale Dupree by any chance? I had him on the channel, and you guys, I feel like you're two peas in a pod.
Yeah, he's a friend.
I know Dale well. Yeah, because he's hilarious with his outbound approaches and the crumpled letter and things like that.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how can someone incorporate their goofiness and bring their full self, say, to maybe their resume or the interview process? Because a lot of folks out here that are checking out this channel want to break into tech sales or land an SDR role like you did.
Yeah, well, I would say in the resume, it'd be a little bit tough. You may be able to punch it up a bit. Dale might know more about that kind of stuff than I do. But in the interviews is something where I really encourage people to let your personality shine. And I think if you separate yourself from the outcome of the interview, of getting the job, if you're able to really do that, then you put less pressure on yourself to appear the way that you believe you need to appear in order to get the job. The reality is you don't know why somebody would really hire you. You have an idea, like you could provide, you provide value, you have skills that are useful to the organization. Sure. Like all that stuff's true, but really why someone decides you over another candidate is fairly mysterious. I've hired people who are immigrants, don't speak English very well or they
Wow.
have thicker accents, I hire them to cold call. And I've had a lot of success hiring people with accents to cold call. Not everybody has had that kind of success. Um, so everyone's decision-making process is different, I guess is my point. So you have no choice but to be yourself, I think, if you really want to be able to get a job at a company that's worthwhile. And if you just try to behave in a way that it aligns with what you think they're looking for, and then they do hire you, well, that's where you're at. You're at a place that values that persona that you portrayed in the interview, not who you really are. That could be a problem.
I've heard it said that the only way to really escape competition is to be unabashedly yourself. And so clearly you're the type of leader I would want to work for, and you'd be creating a culture that I would want to be a part of. And you made a good point. Like you want to, by being yourself, you assure that you land in the right environment where you can shine and be happy and set up hopefully to grow long term. And I'm curious, are there other qualities outside of being a character, being goofy and authentic that you look for when you're hiring specifically for the sales development role?
Yeah, I look for people who ask really good questions, not your traditional like, oh, what does it take to be successful as an SDR here? Like those are fine, but somebody who really asks thoughtful questions based on the conversation always catches my attention. I tell people to do this when you're interviewing and you get asked a question, you should answer it and then ask them a question back. I think it shows that you care, shows that you've done research in some cases too, because you're talking about something that you could only talk about if you had done research. But more importantly, it allows you to dive a little deeper into the person you're interviewing with. And regardless of the company, the person who's hiring you is a person or a collection of people. And the biggest variable for them, especially for entry level positions, is that they like you as a person. They can see themselves working with you, and they believe that you're going to do your best work, or you're going to work hard and you're going to do the best you can. And their perception of your best is enough to meet the requirements that they have for you. So I find candidates who ask a lot of questions that are very thoughtful generally do a lot better in interviews.
And do you have any thoughts on, when answering behavioral questions, we hear classic things like use the STAR methodology, and obviously you want to be crisp and tell good stories, but any particular tips from you on how to deliver effective answers to these behavioral questions?
Yeah, well, give me an example of a behavioral question.
Tell me about a time you received a piece of feedback or constructive criticism and implemented it. That's a classic, right? People, will you want coachability?
Right. Look, whatever framework you just mentioned is probably the right one. I think everyone naturally can answer those questions pretty well. It doesn't take a lot of prep unless like you've never told a story before. I think the bigger problem is you get all like wrapped up in wanting the opportunity so bad and believing that in order to get that opportunity, you have to be a certain way. And then what you find out is that the less of that way you are, the more successful you'll be. It's kind of like that classic bell curve where it's like in the beginning, you don't really know much and you're bumbling around and you're doing pretty well. And then all of a sudden you learn a bunch and then things get very difficult. You put a bunch of stress and pressure on yourself. And then once you've mastered whatever the skill is, it becomes easy, fun, bumbling around again. And you go through this little pain curve and it's really painful in the middle. But being a new and being experienced is actually the same thing. It's just, it takes you this crazy, long, complex journey in order to get to that place where you can truly let go of all of your expectations and live in this whimsical world again, like you did when you were a novice. And that's something I think a lot about. I think people would do a better job looking less at what's the right way to do something and then just they do better if they just were in the present and allowed themselves to appreciate the experience and be truly present in the experience without the burden of the outcome that they're looking for.
I love that I could ask a question like that, expecting a certain answer to an expert like you, and you take it in a whole different direction and you reveal like a subtle mindset and approach that is very powerful, like detaching from the outcome, not worrying about being perfect or saying the right things. That's a trap I fell into in the past. And I had some interviews where I prepared too much and then it was just robotic and it wasn't authentic, and people don't want to hire robots. So
Yeah.
really, really good insight. I'm
Well, let me
curious.
take it real quick. I'll
Yeah,
take you a little bit further here because I think this applies everywhere in life, not just when you're interviewing or
beautiful.
if you're in a sales position. I'm a fan of this gentleman, Alan Watts, and you guys can look him up and
Yeah.
listen to some of his talks. I think they're really fantastic. And he has this talk, and I'm going to paraphrase it pretty heavily, so someone should find it. But it's talking about life is not a journey. And often we look at life as a journey. I've used that phrase plenty of time. And you're kind of in this rat race trying to get to a specific outcome. And the more you view life as a journey, the more you're like, I'm working towards this thing. And then you blink and you realize I'm at the place that I originally was hoping to get at. And this is all there is. This is not like the experience that I was expecting. And the whole time, and as you get older and you retire, you start to realize that the whole time you're looking at life as a journey, but life was more of a music thing. You were supposed to dance or sing while the music was playing. And instead, you were so focused on getting to this outcome, whether it be money, success, material items, or happiness, when in reality it was right there in front of you the whole time. I think that's just another example of that curve that I'm talking about, where we can choose to appreciate the present and live in the present and acknowledge that that's the only real thing there is. The past already happened. It's done. The future, you have no idea. It could be there, it could not be there. And if you truly appreciate the present and detach yourself from the outcomes, generally you're happier along the journey, so to speak, used in a different context here. You're happier along that journey, which is something I wish that I had appreciated when I was earlier in my career.
Thank you to the folks who have shown up live. And Kyle, we're getting comments from full Nelson codes, like a username. That's amazing advice. Seriously,
Cool.
this is so great. Do have you connected with Josh Braun? We had him on the channel at one point, and he wears a hat detach. Have you ever connected with him? Because if
No,
not,
never spoken about this.
you're cut from the same cloth.
That's awesome.
It's really amazing. How do you cultivate a sense of presence? I can tell in this conversation you're very grounded and in the moment. How do you cultivate it? How can we all work on cultivating that?
So I read a lot of Eastern philosophy, which I think does the best job at I don't know, educating on this topic. I tend to care a lot about kind of ancient wisdom, whether it be like Eastern philosophy or Stoic philosophy. I'm Greek, so I like a lot of the Greek Stoics.
Oh, cool.
But probably, I mean, that's probably the best, is to have some kind of philosophy and like really think deeply on it. That's helped me quite a bit. I think meditation is also helpful. That's something that I've appreciated. But those are probably the two ways that I think are best. But the first being the most important. I think you need to explore your sense of self a little bit. And if somebody listening to this were to sit down and like really reflect on themselves, and not necessarily why they do what they do, but acknowledge that their thoughts and emotions are not them as people. I think if you start there and you just sit and you think and really observe your thoughts, really observe your emotions, and discover that they aren't you and you're not them, I think that goes a long way in helping you realize that how you feel about something has nothing to do with the thing that you're experiencing at all. It has everything to do with what's going on between your ears. And that realization, I think, has a really big impact once it's truly felt. And I think it takes some time to truly feel that.
Man, it's gold right there. So what percentage of success, I'm kind of limiting you here, putting you in a box, but what percentage of success in sales is attributed to your beingness, your mindset, as opposed to like tactics or strategies? It's such a broad question, but take it.
No. I mean, I almost feel like very little of it has to do with your beingness. It's just the amount of suffering you feel while being in the role. Sales is a very interesting career because it has ups and downs. That's baked in. And I think maybe every role does, but sales is very numerical. You either hit the number or you don't.
Yeah.
If you don't, has a big impact on your pay. If you do, then you make a lot more money, which is awesome. And it tends to heavily incentivize working very hard and pushing yourself beyond what you would do normally in roles that weren't structured that way. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think the bad thing is how we feel when we're in that environment. And there's a lot of people who are in a sales role, or they get into a sales role and they're like, God, I just don't feel good here. It doesn't mean that working long hours caused you to not feel good. I mean, that might be what it looks like. But in reality, I think there's something deeper going on. So I think so. Part of this, and maybe the weird way that I'm taking your question, is that you have to understand the role that sales as a career is, what it's going to do for you and where it's going to fit in your kind of world and the life that you want to live. And for me, early in my career, I was very career motivated, and I was driven by a lot more than just money. And the money was a nice result, but because I cared less about the money, I probably did a little bit better than I would have otherwise. But I don't know if that's true. So anyway, that's maybe not a direct answer, but I don't know if it has that big of an impact, because I think at the end of the day, you can just work super hard and you'll do well in sales too. Like, you don't have to be mentally healthy and present.
Wow, that actually, it's just fun to ask questions like this and see where it goes. And it's interesting to think that you might not be mentally healthy or present, but still get the results. And that reminds me of a couple influencers I've seen out in the market, out on LinkedIn, that share stories of them making the most money ever in their sales career and being miserable on the inside.
Yeah. I mean, listen to, I'm a big fan of Dave Ramsey.
Yeah.
You hear people call in all the time that make 200 grand a year, who are underwater in debt and living paycheck to paycheck. You don't even need to listen to Dave Ramsey to hear those stories. You know that they exist. So is there a correlation there? Sure, of course. You make more money, you're generally going to be doing better. But suffering comes from the inside, and that's going to happen whether you're very successful or you're not very successful. And I think that's something that's really worth reflecting on for folks. It has been for me, at least.
So thank you for getting us thinking more deeply. And I have one more deep question for now, and then we could flip back to some, tactical aspects of sales development. It's just such a big question, but like, what makes a great life to you? Like, what is important to your happiness in life? I just love asking folks this question.
Yeah, it's a really tough one to answer, I think, because maybe day by day it changes. I think this element of being present is very important to me. And the less disconnected I am from the current experience, the happier I feel. That's probably it. Probably it, because I'm happy when I'm playing with my kids, and I'm also happy when I'm on a plane flying to go speak at some conference. And it might sound a little strange to say, well, are you equally as happy in those moments? It sounds weird for me to say this out loud, but I think the answer is yeah. Consciously, I would prefer, like, intellectually, I'd prefer to be with my kids. But I don't know if that's actually true. I think I appreciate any experience that I'm currently engaged in.
Yeah, thank you for digging deep and stepping up to the plate and knocking that out of the park. Adrian Huger says, well put, the wisdom is phenomenal. You're dropping gold here. So really great. All right, let's, speaking of gold, shift to a topic everyone loves, especially on this channel, cold calling.
Yeah, my favorite.
And you've got a script that you've tested with almost 4 million calls. I saw a post, maybe it's more now. And you're setting meetings, or those who use this script are setting meetings 1/10 of the time, which is actually really good. And it's your golden script. And I know that, I saw a post and people could, maybe message you to get the script. But are you willing to share insight into the golden script? Because
totally.
That would be amazing.
Totally. But I will also preface this, which I actually don't think it matters all that much.
Really?
The biggest variable you have on a cold call is how you sound. That's by far the most important.
Let's dig into that. And the script is interesting, but what people don't realize what you're saying, the truth is it matters how you deliver it. Go ahead.
Totally right. So for example, I like to start cold calls with, how are you? I say, hey, how's it going? Hey, this is Kyle calling from Vouris. How's it going? Some people are very passionate that how are you is not the right way to start a cold call. I've been doing it for years. So I don't know if that matters all that much. I don't know how much a permission-based opener is effective versus not using a permission-based opener. So for those of you who don't know, the one that I like is, do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions and let you decide if we should chat? I don't know. I did a test. It worked a lot better for my team. So that's why I started using it. It's worked well for people. But then I meet people who did a test on their own. They felt that it didn't work well. I've also had some reps that do really well with a certain script and other reps not do well with the script. So the more that I've been in this role and have had a lot of exposure to SDRs and cold calls, the more I believe the person using a script that they're comfortable with, that aligns with how they communicate and they are confident in, the better they'll do. So I care a lot less about the script and a lot more about how comfortable somebody is on a cold call. And I found much more success with helping people become more comfortable on a cold call than I have with giving them a special script.
It's almost like trying on clothing, like what clothes do you feel most yourself in?
Yeah,
And for me, it might be different than for you.
right.
And I have heard from one of my new friends that moved to Austin, Trent Dressel. You might be aware of him, but he's done a lot of cold calls out in the real world, and he does exactly what you said. How are you? He's big on that. But then we had Jason Bay on the channel, and he talks about his permission-based openers,
Yeah,
and they both work. It just comes down to authenticity.
that's
And
right.
so I am curious, how can people who are a little bit disconnected from that true power that's innately within them, a little disconnected from their authenticity because of nerves, which is
Yeah.
natural, how can they get in touch with that authenticity? Maybe you have a mindset shift or some high level perspective on how to tap into that.
Yeah, I have an exercise for people to try. No one will do it, but if you do, I'll be very proud of you. Here's the exercise. Get like a notebook and a piece of paper or pencil.
Okay.
Or pen, whatever. Grab something. Okay. Then go out into the wilderness, not the real wilderness.
Oh,
Go
shoot.
into the city. Yeah. Yeah. It involves leaving your current location, which is why nobody does this. But you actually leave your house, go to like a mall, go
Yeah.
to downtown Austin, right? Go to San Francisco.
Yeah.
I do this with every team I run. And you get your little clipboard and your pen, you walk out there, you approach strangers on the street, and you ask them to write down their first impression of you. You just walk up and say, hey, real quick, I'm doing an exercise here. Do you mind writing down your first impression of me?
Wow.
Then you do that and try to get as many as you can in whatever your time window is. And if you do this in a group, you'll find that some people are a little slower to start. Other people are much faster to start. Everyone's a little bit different depending on their comfort level with approaching strangers. Here's what happened. And I did this exercise when I was 21, and it completely changed my life. At that time for me, I was in a pretty dark place. I was very depressed, and I could barely approach people on the street and ask them to write their first impression of me. And at the end, what you'll find when you read through it, and this is what I found, is people generally have nice things to say about their first impression with you. And furthermore, you realize that not everyone's noticing you like the way you think they would notice you, right? A lot of times we're our own harshest critics, or maybe every time. So the exercise you come out of gives you a really strong sense of confidence, because you realize that generally people have a positive impression of you, and all of the stuff that prevents you from either making the call or being confident on a cold call doesn't actually matter. And for me, it was an overnight transformation. I was much more confident after doing that exercise than before. And for the teams that I've taken through it, for the people who needed an exercise like that, it is very effective for.
Yeah, I felt something in my gut, like a little anxiousness when you mentioned that.
Yeah, can you
Going up
imagine?
to strangers, and to get there, because you what if they say something mean? But to your point, like, oh my gosh, it sounds like this is transformational when you realize they mostly said positive things and they're not
Yeah.
thinking about you as much as you think.
No, people don't even notice you. And they're also not going to remember you too. When you cold call a lot, you also realize that people don't remember you at all.
Yeah.
So when I was an SDR, I was cold calling salons and spas. And you'd think, like, I have a pretty recognizable voice. You'd think that you'd realize, oh, this person has called me again. I would call people 3 days later after they said not interested and hung up on me, and they would not recognize me.
Wow. You do have a unique voice. You do have
Yeah.
it sounds like you should, which I'm sure you have a podcast, right?
Yeah, we do.
Okay. No, it definitely resonates. And yet you're saying they didn't remember you. It's so cool to think that you could get rejected by a prospect, absolutely fall on your face, and then, weeks, months later, call them up and things could have changed and they don't remember you and you get
You
the
can
meeting.
call
And that,
them 2 days later and they won't
wow.
remember you. It's mind blowing. I've had situations where I called them later that day and was able to book a meeting. I mean, the volume of calling we used to do back then was just absurd. And this was before we had dialers or anything. I mean, we had click to call, which was like a huge, you talk to people older than me, they'll look down on me and say, oh, he had click to call. I was dialing numbers like this. So anyway, maybe that was my advantage, but we used to make a ton of calls. And I've called people later in the afternoon after they hung up on me. If they hung up on me really quick and they were just said not interested after I said, my little intro, I'd call them a little bit later. And I've booked meetings like that before.
That is so powerful. Imagine like the transformation someone might experience internally when they see the evidence that they can succeed even after being rejected fairly recently. And it just disproves any limiting beliefs. And oh gosh, who did I have? Someone else on the channel, Marcus Chan. He did a post on how he met his wife. And she rejected him at the cafeteria lunch line. I think it was in college. And he said, what would the best version of myself do? And he actually went back to her and got her number.
That's
Like,
awesome.
it's just amazing how that can happen. But we get a comment, Kyle. Hey, Kyle, what about a church setting? I'm going to a new church this week. Thought I might try it. Or does it need to be a random place? I feel like I know the answer, but feel free to.
Do it in a church. You can do it anywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
A church is probably fine. Maybe they will be a little nicer.
They'll be nice. Yeah.
I would probably go somewhere very stranger. Like you don't know anybody. And it's funny because you'd almost think that would be the easier one because you're like, I don't know anybody here. I can't look like an idiot because I've never seen any of these people again. But it ends up being the hardest. And your first approach is the scariest because you're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I'm going to stop. Like I literally stood in front of someone and went like this, like a stop hand. And I was like, stop. And they stopped. I was like, hi. And it started talking. It was just, your first one's a little awkward. And then, I found out it's easier to this is going to sound like it wouldn't be the right way to do it, but it was actually pretty easy to be like walking up from behind somebody. And then right when you get next to them, you turn and look at them and then you start talking. So, don't talk from behind them and scare them, but start walking a little bit, then turn, look at them, go, hey, actually real quick. Like that I found was pretty easy for me. But I would go somewhere where you don't know anybody. If you don't know anybody at the church, maybe, but I don't know. I'd prefer you to go somewhere out in public.
Yeah, that's great advice. So the church, people will be nice, but it might be good to actually challenge yourself personally to go out to a foreign environment. And I will say this is funny. It's almost cringy, but when I was younger, like in college, I was really afraid of girls, and I had a period where I forced myself to go talk to girls, and I had some really awkward moments where I was like, hi, and they literally saw me and just kept walking.
Yeah.
But eventually I had some amazing experiences where I did connect with someone, and it was very transformative. So if anything, guys, I encourage you all to just keep putting yourself out there, take risks. And I feel like when you take risks like this, what you're saying, Kyle, is this can translate to cold calling and it feels like nothing.
Yeah. I mean, that's the key. Like if you can genuinely have a good time cold calling, I always treated everybody like a puzzle. Can I figure it out? And if I didn't do it, it wasn't because I was bad. I mean, sometimes it's like I did something stupid. I was like, that didn't really work. But for the most part, it's just like I didn't figure out how the pieces were supposed to go together for that person. Doesn't mean I'm going to win everybody. Actually, funny enough, you never win most of the people you talk to. So by the nature of the action, it's inefficient. You are fighting for percentage points, small ones. And if I can just get 1% higher conversion, that's a big, big impact for me. So, you treat everybody like a puzzle and you're like, I'm trying to figure out what's the right way to get somebody like this to convert. What happens if somebody says X to me? How can I respond? What's the best way to respond to that? And you keep playing around, you keep experimenting. It makes it a little bit more fun. And then you start to figure it out. And then you can have fun. Like we used to play games. Here's another activity for people to do. See if you can work the word pufferfish into a cold call. Sounds wild, but all of a sudden you'll be focused on a completely different thing. You won't be focused on booking a meeting. You're going to be focused on how do I get the word pufferfish to make sense.
That's unreal.
In this cold call. And what you find is sometimes those are your best cold calls because you actually were able to work it in. We used to do these little games where we would pick a word, pumpernickel or whatever it is, right? We would pick a word and try to incorporate a weird word into our cold calls. And some of my best cold calls were like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think of how I'd incorporate it. I feel like a pufferfish right now. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you could do that.
You might actually authentically laugh with the customer and have this point of connection. I love, Kyle, that you brought a couple exercises to the table that I've never heard before, and I've had quite a few, thought leaders like yourself in this space. So it really is saying something. I'd love to talk now about once you're in there like swimwear for the cold call. You have the opportunity to share why you're calling, or how you help similar customers. How do you approach that piece? Like, what high level might you say? I guess.
Yeah. So look, my belief is we should be having conversations. So it's not so much about a pitch. It's more about, can I help this person? So what I generally do is I say something along the lines of, typically when I talk to whatever type of role they're in, right? CMOs, founders, whatever it is. Typically when I talk to founders, they tell me that they struggle with one of two things: challenge number one or challenge number two. Curious, which one of those resonates more with you?
Mm.
Why does it resonate? How are you trying to manage that today? What are you trying to do to fix it? Like, then you can ask questions like that. And the whole goal is try to learn more about their problem, the impacts of those problems, how they're trying to solve those problems, and then positioning yourself as a solution to that problem, and then booking a meeting from there. And I've always found that that's been more effective for me than pitching aggressively up front.
That is so simple, so crisp and effective right there. That's all we really needed today, was to hear, framing a couple problems that you typically see when you talk to similar CMOs or other executives, seeing which is, I guess, something they're experiencing, which is a priority, asking probing questions to further understand the priority, the pain. And one question I have for you is, when you set that meeting, like, what might the phraseology look like once you identify, oh, there's a legit pain, we've helped similar customers? Like, what does that look like?
So once you feel like you have a strong pain point, a reason for them to meet, what I generally do is I give a recap. So I'll say, all right, so what I've heard so far is, and you sort of repeat their challenge to them, and you've tried X, Y, and Z. Why don't we do this? Which is, by the way, my favorite way to ask for a meeting is recap. Why don't we do this? That's my favorite phrase. It's super smooth. It's non-pushy. And I go, why don't we do this? Let's set aside some time. We'll walk you through how we've helped other founders solve X challenge. How about tomorrow at 3:00? Just give them a time. So what's interesting about it is you're saying, why don't we do this? Which is very soft. Why don't we do this? Blah, 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 blah. But you're giving them a time. So you're being assumptive. And since you're leading into that assumptive with a reason why you think this is the right thing to do, because you're recapping, and then you're being soft by saying, why don't we do this? It's very collaborative. And then a best practice is to be assumptive, which is a more aggressive technique. You're very balanced in your ending, and it doesn't feel like you've turned from this question asker, thoughtful conversationalist into some shark salesperson. It flows very naturally. That's why I like doing it.
Why don't we do this is such a good line. It is, soft and at the same time, it's kind of badass. It seems like you're taking charge, but in like almost like a caring parent would. Like, hey,
right. Well, think about it.
Why don't we do this? Like, that's me.
If you're an SDR, you talk to more of their role than they do. I mean, now that for a second, if you cold call CMOs and you've been an SDR for 6 months, how many CMOs have you talked to? Way more than any given CMO that you speak with, most likely. So in a way, you do understand the role a bit better than they do. Maybe not understand the day-to-day, but you understand this high-level challenge and what they care about. And you know a lot about this problem that you solve because you're working at a company that solves it. So there's no reason why after a couple of months of cold calling, you shouldn't view yourself as the authority.
That's encouraging to know as an SDR, that although you might not have as many years of experience in your career, and maybe you don't know their specific business like they do, you are more of an expert in the problems that other CMOs might face. Totally. And you do have a lot of value to bring to the table. So that's actually very encouraging to boost self-esteem and contribute to that authenticity and confidence in the cold call conversation.
You have to belong. If you don't feel like you belong in the conversation, you are not going to do very well cold calling for long. You need to be able to go to an industry event of CMO, speak with a CMO, and then be shocked to find out that you're not one. That's what you need to achieve. And if you can do that, cold calling will be a walk in the park.
Wow. So we talked about cold calling. This was a clinic on cold calling. And I think of cold calling as spearfishing. It's a little more aggressive and messy, but you're more likely to walk away with a big one. And cold emailing is kind of like casting out the lure and bobbing it in the follow-ups. And I borrowed that from another thought leader out there. And I forget who it was. I heard it on 30 Minutes to President's Club. You ever check out that podcast?
Yeah, I haven't listened to it, but I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, it's solid. But anyway, so segue, a long way to segue to cold email. And I just love to hear some high level thoughts on, how to write effective cold emails to complement your cold calling efforts.
Yeah, so I do these separately. So I'm not a huge fan of sequences, which might be a little
Oh,
contrarian.
okay.
I think you get there at a certain point, but I don't believe the appropriate thing to do is to start with the sequence. Instead, I rather start with cold calling. I'd like to add email once we get that cold calling muscle built a little
Oh,
bit. That might be 2 weeks, it doesn't have to be long, but I like to do them in waves. And the reason why is because I find that if I can focus on one thing, or if a rep focuses on one thing, they can get good at that one thing and they build that muscle so they can do that one thing efficiently. The challenge with sequences and mixing email and cold calls are two challenges. One, early cold calling is very uncomfortable. So reps typically tend to go towards comfort, which will be email, where they don't have to do as many calls.
I still do that sometimes,
We all do.
so
It's natural. But then the other reason why is because when you sit down to cold call, if you call, email, call, email, call, email, you're going to achieve a lot less than if you just did an hour of dedicated calling, an hour of dedicated emailing. So I like to keep these things split up. And I think sequences make it a bit harder to keep those things split up early on until like you really kind of understand the workflow for each. So to get to your actual
quick
question.
point, Kyle.
Yeah, go
Quick
ahead.
point is that what you're speaking to reminds me of the concept of periodization. And I
Mhm.
think that Olympic athletes use this, or professional athletes, to learn one skill set at a time. And so it's interesting that you are applying that to sales, which is really like, in a way, it's a profession that's similar to being a pro athlete. And so very insightful. And I actually haven't heard this, that you break up the development of cold calling skills in cold emailing. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, if the Olympians use it, then so can we. It's good enough for them.
You're the
But yeah, I do.
Olympian
I think
of
it's good.
startup sales.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyways, yeah.
No, I think it's useful. I think it's useful just to stick to one thing, build the muscle, and then move to the next. And look, for cold emails, I always start automated before I start personalizing, which is also another contrarian take. I think if you can't get people to respond to an automated email, then there's no way you're going to get people to respond to a personalized one.
Wow.
Now, they might respond and say, "Oh, thanks, not interested." Like they might just feel inclined to respond because you personalized it. But remember, we want them to book a meeting with us because they have a problem that we can solve. If we can't clearly articulate that problem in a way to where automation can't book us meetings, why do we think that that problem is going to resonate when we send way less emails? So what I generally do is I start with automation. Once we have messaging that can convert as you're sending out automated emails, then I go, okay, I know I can add personalization to this to increase the chances of somebody reading the email fully and then giving me a real response. So that's how I look at it. It's a little bit contrarian, but yeah, I really try to focus on copy, finding the problem that resonates with the people using automation because I'm going one to a lot. And then once I start understanding what the messaging needs to be, then we'll start adding personalization to it and see what impact that has on the conversion rates.
Kyle, I've been in tech sales for 9 years. I'm no sales Sherpa, but I've been at Oracle, Google Cloud, and now a startup. And I've read all these sales books, had a lot of folks on the channel, and you continue to blow my mind with these outside the box perspectives. Because I've always started with like personalization, and I'm really big on that, and it can be effective. But I love the thought that it's totally different from anything I've taken on before, that start with the automation and just really good copy that gets meetings based on problems you solve, and then move to personalization.
I mean, we have the automation. We might as well use it. It doesn't mean we have to use it for everybody. And if you only have 100 people that you could reach out to, maybe you do just personalize the entire time. But for the most part, people have a lot more than 100. They have a couple of thousands, and you can always email somebody again. So I don't see a problem with experimenting with messaging on a large lead list to figure out what resonates most. And then as we understand that, then adding personalization as a tool to increase our conversion rates. But if you take this a step further, you have to realize you're also competing with cold calls. So if you can be more effective cold calling in the same amount of time that you're cold emailing with personalization, then you should just cold call instead. Like, why are we personalizing cold emails unless it's worth our time compared to other activities we could be doing.
Interesting.
So I let the data drive a lot of the decision making. In some industries, personalized cold email is going to be a lot more effective than cold calling. Not always. Usually it's not, by the way. So every minute I'm not cold calling is a minute that I'm doing a different activity. And it might feel good to send personalized emails because I don't know, the people on LinkedIn have decided that that's how email should be done. It doesn't necessarily make it the right decision.
Wow. Yeah, I could tell you really are focused on the right activities that move the needle, and you are aware of the opportunity cost of focusing on one thing over the
So
other.
I'll give you a real example of this. I got in a debate with somebody at one point. What you don't see very often anymore, by the way. But at one point, I don't know, the stars aligned, and I was debating somebody about doing research before cold calls. I said it's not necessary. I don't need to look up anything about somebody. I just need their name and their title. And if I understand the problem that we're solving, I'm going to be able to have a fruitful conversation. They strongly disagreed with that. So I said, okay, well, how much should you research? How much time do you spend researching before a cold call? They said, 3 to 5 minutes. So I did the math and I said, let's just take 3 minutes as an example. And I modeled it out completely the same with 3 minutes of research and then, or with 3 minutes between each call versus I think I get 30 seconds in between each call. So I didn't even do, in reality, there's no seconds, but I mean, you can call almost instantly, but I was like, let's just say there's 30 seconds between each call versus 3 minutes in between each call because that person's researching. The conversion on a connect would have to be double in order to justify the 3 minutes to before every single call. Double. So that means if you're not impacting your phone conversion rate by 2x, it didn't make sense doing the research beforehand. But it feels good. Oh, I know the person that I'm calling more. You don't know anything. I'm going to ask them everything I need to know anyway. Like what? All of a sudden, like what do I gain? I get to now say like, oh, I saw on LinkedIn. No one cares about that. Hey, I generally talk to people. They tell me they struggle with these things. Which one resonates with you? I'm asking the same question, So anyway, it's just
Kyle, it's like you're really hitting home with me because I sent about 15 to 20 personalized emails today to big like billion-dollar companies or big companies, and I realized like maybe I could focus more on the cold calls and just focusing more on a specific problem, and I did feel good. But there's a difference between what feels good and what works. And that's actually a great principle for life in general.
Yeah, 100%. There's a huge difference between what feels good and what works. But here's what I want people to take away from this. I don't know what that is. I never claim that I know the way. The data tells me what works. And if your 15 to 20 cold emails are converting enough for you to hit your quota and it's working, then don't listen to a word that don't change it. It's working. But if it's not, then it's like, okay, let me redirect my focus. Because maybe your 15 to 20 personalized email underperforms when sending 1,000 emails all at once. Now, of course, there's a lot more involved. That's probably not the right decision if you were to compare the two, because there's your deliverability. Can you even send 1,000 emails if you have a small target market? Is it too many? Is it too many emails for such a small market? There's a lot of other things involved there. So I don't want to oversimplify it, but it is like I can just to illustrate this point. You have to decide what's the right weight that you're doing your activities. And what I find often for most organizations, they should kind of just be cold calling. And they so badly want SDRs. Don't even get me started about lists. I don't think SDRs should create lead lists. I think the lead list should be created by leadership and given to the SDR. We can go down that rabbit hole too. But I'll look at a company and you look at the data and it's like, hey, this team should just be cold calling a bunch. And until we have this cold calling muscle really working well, let's not add any other channel. Okay, now this is operating well. Let's add email. And then you're like, okay, now email is an additional channel for me. See, people started believing, wrongly, by the way, there's more sales tech today than ever before. I'm going to get a little preachy here. There's more sales tech today than ever before, yet less sales teams hit their quota than ever before. But these tools said that we're going to be more efficient. We're going to book more meetings. We're going to drive more revenue. They're all ROI positive. It's bullshit. It's not true. The technology is not leading to that result. But so many people started to believe that the sequence was the channel. The sequence isn't the channel. It's never been the channel. It's a way of organizing tasks. The tasks are the channel. LinkedIn is a channel. Cold calling is a channel. Email is a channel. A sequence organizes those tasks, but people started creating sequences without the data of what the sequences need to be compiled of, which tasks are necessary for us to hit the results that we need to hit. And that's the mistake everybody's made. So they moved away from focusing on tasks and instead focused on sequence, haven't hit their numbers in years, and are all being caught with their pants down. They're laying off salespeople left and right. Look at any stat about SDR performance, AE performance, company sales performance. They're abysmal. They're abysmal. They were abysmal before COVID. They're abysmal after COVID. And what have we seen? Mass layoffs. And what everyone does, they point at the company and they say, oh, the company shouldn't have had to lay anybody off. Their numbers are doing well. No, their numbers aren't doing well. Their net revenue retention dropped through the floor. So now their customer acquisition costs are super bloated because they have this crazy sales team, but they could justify that sales team because their net revenue retention was high enough. And for those of you who don't know, net revenue retention is the percentage increase of your customer base every year. So if you're at 120% net revenue retention, that means every year your current book of business, your current active customers are growing by 20%. You'll pay whatever you want to acquire a customer at that point. But then what happened is as the economy started fumbling a little bit, those numbers dropped. And then it went from 120% to 110 to 100 to 90. And then our customer acquisition costs, where we were super bloated, but we felt like we could be because our net revenue retention was carrying the weight. All of a sudden we realized we can't justify that anymore. Now it's time for people to get focused again and realize, hey, we need to actually pay attention to what activities move the needle and over-index on those activities. And then, and only then, can we focus on how to expand the activities or the channel that we leverage in order to hit other milestones that we're trying to hit. Anyway, off soapbox.
Preach it, Kyle. Guys, if you want to be successful, just pay attention to the passion that Kyle just demonstrated there. That is so cool to see you come alive. And clearly you have found your calling in helping these companies, these SaaS companies grow, and SDRs, SDR managers and AEs just become more effective by clearly looking at the data and focusing on the right tasks. And you've really busted some myths and got me thinking differently to shift from what feels good to what actually works. And again, I'm 9 years in. I don't have the most experience, but I've been doing this for a bit. And you've just given me a lot of, aha moments. And so we got like 13 minutes. I want to squeeze out as much value as possible in these 13 minutes. We do have some questions. I see 2 questions floating out here that I wanted to turn over to you. One of them has to do with creating great copy. What sources do you draw from to create great sales copy? Because clearly you're saying you can build great copy and scale it, and it's more important than personalization.
Yeah, I think the copy is way more important. And everyone knows that this is true too, despite what influencers might say. If you sit down with them and you ask them, you say, why do you personalize? What's the purpose of personalizing? It's to get somebody to open the email, read, realize that this is tailored to them, meaning it's probably more relevant, and for them to finish reading. The personalization doesn't invent the need. The relevance of the challenge you're articulating to them is either touching on something that they need or not. It's either exposing a challenge that they feel like they have and they're looking for a solution for, or it's not. So you need to figure that part out, because that part determines if it's a positive or a negative response. If I show that I did some research, somebody might be nice and respond to it, but they're going to say no. And anybody who's done personalization at a company that isn't fully baked as far as what their value proposition is knows this to be true. It's very challenging. You run into this with video outreach all the time too. Video outreach is the best way to do prospecting, unless it's not, right? Anyway, how do you think of good copy? Our CMO, he used to train copywriters. He's been a professional copywriter.
What a skill, by the way. And Think and Grow Rich, doesn't, did you ever read, sorry to interrupt you, but I have to interject real quick. Did you read Think and Grow Rich? What do you think? He says that copywriting is one of the most important skill sets. So I'm just excited that you're digging into this. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, look, our CMO at Vouris, his name's Dan McDermott. People should follow him. He's fantastic at it. And he's been diving deep into this methodology called jobs to be done. I'm not super familiar with it. Also, I'm not like a wizard copywriter. If you read my copy, it's very simple, and it's kind of like how I talk, which might be a good thing. But I can give you some tips. But follow Dan.
Okay.
Dan's awesome. A couple of things. One, I actually do have opinions on subject lines. So subject lines for me should be 2 to 3 words max, and it should sound like internal emails. So we don't do cold email anymore for our business, but when we did, my number one performing email subject line was sales team. That was it. Sales team. I would do the same with marketing team, whatever.
What about Kyle? Like I've been in the cloud space. Now I'm a cloud consultant. We help reduce costs in the cloud. Companies do more with less. High level. It sounds like fluff, but like cloud costs,
I would do like cloud infrastructure.
Okay.
Our cloud. I would probably say our cloud. That would be interesting to try. Because what happens is someone reads it, they're like, what is this? And they like click on it. Anything to make them think it's internal or go like, huh? And then they'll click and open it.
Taking notes. Okay.
Yeah. But that's why I would go that way versus cloud costs. I could see them thinking like, our cloud costs might be better.
Oh, wow. Mind blown and yet again.
Awesome. Yeah. So I would play around with that a little bit for sure. Also, there's a zig and a zag element here too. So when they're zigging, you need to zag. One day, this is a fun story. I get not one day. I get emails from my dad quite a bit. He's retired. He wants to talk to me about stuff. And he just shoots me because he knows I won't respond to my text. So he emails me because he knows he gets a faster response. And he actually hates that I hired an EA a year ago because now like it takes longer than it used to. But he used to shoot me an email and he would never do a subject line. And then I started to know like the no subject, because it automatically fills no subject, right?
Yeah.
So parentheses, no subject written inside the parentheses. So I started like, that used to be the trigger. That's my dad emailing me. And I started responding. And then one day I was like, wait a minute. What if I just started sending emails without subject lines? Because it was so weird when I first saw it that I opened it.
Wow.
And they crushed. It was like my best of all time. And then a bunch of people started doing it. I give my dad full credit for coming up with the idea. Best open rates I've had.
Oh my gosh.
Other people started doing it. It became way less effective. So then I stopped.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, I'm zagging now. So maybe we go back to it because I don't see it as often as I used to. So anyway, that's like a kind of a little trick, is try to keep them really short. And then I'm one of these like really short body paragraph kind of guys. I try to keep the email under 100 words or 100 characters, whatever the best practices they say there. And I'll usually do a sentence like, hey, when kind of like my cold call script, honestly, where it's like, hey, when I typically talk to CEOs, they tell me that they're struggling with X. Curious if this is top of mind for you. There's a lot of different ways to do them. Sometimes I like the little bullet point thing. Sometimes I don't. I experiment with different stuff. If there's something I'm passionate about, is I like the yes, no CTA versus asking for a meeting.
I've heard that there's data on that, like a yes, no, or like, is this interesting? Tell me if I'm on the right path. Actually does much, like maybe 3 times better. I don't know. Don't quote.
That's what they say. I never know what to believe, because then I talk to somebody and they're just like, oh yeah, we send calendar links and book meetings all the time. So I'm like, okay, I guess I just don't know what I'm talking about. You just got to test different things and see what works for you, I guess. But I do prefer that. And it seems to work better from my perspective. So I keep doing it. But again, for every one of me, there's somebody else who says, oh no, you should ask for a meeting, and it works. So
I've also heard, I mean, there's so many creative things, like our buddy Dale Dupree with sending his crumpled letters and empty donut boxes, and blind calendar invites can work too. But so helpful to understand.
Not anymore, by the way, just in case somebody's listening does that. No. So I've never done that because I just don't like it.
I never did it either, but people say it works. Yeah,
it just seems really shady to me. But anyway, so it did work for a little bit. I had people saying good stuff about it, but Google changed something. I don't know if you've noticed this, where if you have no email back and forth email history with the person you send a calendar invite to, it doesn't show up on their calendar anymore.
Oh, so maybe
email saying they've been invited to whatever. And if they click accept, then it shows on their calendar. If we've had an email communication before, that will go on my calendar like normal.
Interesting.
If we never have, then that I get an email first. And if I don't accept that email, that calendar invite, it doesn't show up on my calendar.
Wow. And I wonder if it's the same with Microsoft Teams,
Probably.
But either way.
This was a direct response to that stuff. because that was super popular 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago.
Yeah.
That got really popular.
So we got 5 minutes left, and I love your passion, and I'm curious, like you could speak to anything business development and also like growing sales teams at startups and just in general. Like what's a topic that might be really fun to talk about? I know I could tell like processes, you're really good at that. You're really great with data. And I'm just curious if we could speak to like processes for an individual or growing a company, but like, I'm happy to give more pointed questions, but is there a topic that you were so passionate about that you wanted to take us home with?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll talk about anything. I'm very passionate about data-driven kind of sales process. I love to also just like being happier. I'm very passionate about that as well, and like people not beating themselves up so much. I mean, I can talk about anything. I just think so many people are sad, and that's not a good place to be. Having so many people that are sad all the time, or they're trying to be happy, and then they get to a place. Look, I today am where I dreamed of being. When I started my company, I could only dream of being where I am now. Are you kidding me? Like it was such an ideal situation. And then I blinked and I was here. Fortunately, I've gotten to a place where I can appreciate where I am now. But on the way to getting here, I had hit that point of dream well before I appreciated the environment that I had created. And I lived in a state of constant frustration and anguish. And part of it, I believe, is because psychologically I felt like I needed to feel like I was backed into a corner because I performed better and would yield better results. And as I've sort of, I don't know, matured is the wrong word because this is a different type of maturity that isn't as obvious. But as I've started to better understand myself, and as people better understand themselves, I think what they'll find is that happiness or that contentment that they're seeking is there the whole time. And it's there whether you've achieved whatever milestone you've given yourself or not. And it's really interesting to me to look and say, gosh, if I sat down with my old self and said, what do you want to achieve? And listen to myself say that, and then asked, why do you want to achieve those things? And listen to myself say, because I wanted to feel freedom, or I wanted to be happy. Well, how are you going to feel that? Well, because if I have financial freedom, then I'll be able to spend more time with my kids. Yeah. I'll be able to spend more time with my family. Okay, well, why can't you just do that now? You don't need all the obstacles, but we put them there because the reality is we want ourselves to be unhappy. And that part is really difficult.
That resonates with me right now because I'm working on a course to help people land a job in tech sales and get promoted within a year. I'm calling it Tech Sales Accelerator. And I'm deep into the filming. It's the biggest project I've ever done in editing, and getting close, trying to launch it in March. And I felt such frustration and difficult emotions and almost depression at times, and moments of joy too. And I don't know if it's like similar to what you're describing in a way, like it's just like almost making myself miserable. And so I don't know, I see myself, is that somewhat similar to?
Yeah, you're making yourself miserable. This is, and I say this a lot, not everybody agrees with me, but this is what I know to be true. Misery comes from inside. Joy comes from inside. We just think it comes from external forces. And we know this because two people can have the same experience and respond in very different ways. So in Buddhism, there's an anecdote that I love. And there's a good book called Buddha's Brain, which talks about the neuroscience behind mindfulness practices. And this is where I got this anecdote from, or this story. There's two darts, and there's different ways of telling the story. Sometimes I call them arrows, but I know the darts. There's two darts. The first dart is something that happens to you. So for example, I walk into my house, I step on a Lego. I take off my shoes, I step on a Lego. The first dart is the pain I feel from stepping on the Lego. The second dart is my emotional response to that pain. That's suffering. So I walk into the house, I step on a Lego, ow, dart one. I go scream at my kids to clean up the house. That's dart two. Repeat that over and over and over again. And what you'll find is often you have a second dart response when a first dart was never present. If you've ever misread a text or an email and got all mad and the person didn't mean it that way, then you get what I'm talking about. You had a complete emotional response to something that wasn't actually true. That was a second dart reaction when a first dart wasn't even present. And part of this awakening, as they have the eightfold path is what the Buddhists tried to reach enlightenment. That's their philosophy. And if you were to kind of break down enlightenment, you could say step one is I have no awareness of this happening. I walk in, I step on the Lego, I yell at my kids, no awareness. The second one is the same thing happens. I walk in, step on a Lego, yell at my kids, but I'm aware that I'm doing it. I'm aware that it's a second dart reaction. This third step is I go in, I step on a Lego, I feel the pain. I feel the rage of that second dart, but I don't do anything. I'm able to stop it. And then the final phase is I walk in, I step on the Lego, I feel that first dart. I step off the Lego, I bend down, I pick it up, I put it where it's supposed to go, and I go hug my kids and say, hey, it's good to see you. I've been gone all day. That's what everyone's trying to get to, or that would be true peace. But it's very hard in practice.
Oh, man. Cheers to true peace for all of us. And thank you for sharing just such profound wisdom today, balanced with tactical strategies to succeed in business development. We are on time. I'm not going to lie, Kyle. I had 3 questions I wanted to ask you, but I'm willing to cut it off. Your time is very valuable.
I'm good.
Are you okay? Because one of these questions is actually from our audience that I skipped over, and I don't want to leave that stone unturned. And so it might feel like a random question now going back to it, but how important is in-person networking for finding and building relationships with prospects? Have you found in-person networking has been important?
I think in-person is the most powerful, right? Because you're right there in person with the other person. So of course, like the connection's better. Like I often say, I've never walked out of a Zoom meeting and been like magic happened, but in person, I've had that experience before.
Except for this, by the way.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe
magic did happen here today.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, I think that in-person communication is really important. And by the way, maybe magic happened on this call because we were both present. That's probably a big part of it. But either way, yes, I think that's valuable. I think intent also matters. Like, for example, I've tried to get partnerships to work for our business quite a bit, and I just failed miserably at it time and time again. It just would never be consistent. It's very difficult to make work. And then now we have one partner that drives the vast majority of our business. That came from friendship first and then partnership second. So I think intent also matters. With prospecting, it's a little bit different. You go to an event, meet somebody in person. I think that'll be really effective. But otherwise, I think meeting without expectation, building relationship without expectation, I think is really valuable.
That's really helpful because I have a lunch with a prospect, a pretty big company on Wednesday, and I'm going to go in without expectation and just be authentic and connect. So
yeah, whichever salesperson is most willing to lose the deal is the one who typically gets it.
Wow. That's just a principle that applies to so many things. I tend to shift it back to dating too, but
well, because they can be truly honest.
Yeah.
And that's like the biggest concern. Like the biggest barrier to sales is information. And the biggest barrier to getting information is trust. That's why everyone cares about trust so much. And it's like, oh, how do you build trust with your prospects? Well, we're talking about the wrong thing. Trust doesn't come from a tactic that I use. It's from being trustworthy. That's like a behavior. And if you can embody that behavior, just genuinely care about people. I talk to probably 10 founders, like sales calls every single week. Depends on the week, but probably 10 on average. And 9 of them, I say, I can't work with you. I turn them away. Part of that's because I can only take 12 customers at a time. I have a team of 5 people, and that we have a very hands-on service. But the other reason too is because I don't want to put a square peg in a round hole. If it's not a good fit, it's not a good fit. Eventually it will be, or you might come across somebody who is. And I've found over the years, you don't feel it at first. Year 1, you don't feel it. Year 2, you don't feel it. Year 3, you start to feel it. And what you feel is that people just respect you and talk about you when you're not around. And that drives more people to you. So anyway, I think if you just live with integrity and honesty for a long enough time, it just sort of comes around. But it's not something you can like master plan with like a chessboard.
Amen. So second to last question is, what is your vision going forward? You've achieved a lot of success and you're doing great things helping founders. What's next for, whether it's for Vouris, like professionally, personally? And also I'm asking because I want to know how I could be supportive of this audience too. You never know who's out there that could enable that vision.
Yeah, well, I will say this. I'm a big goal setter. So you actually mentioned two of my goal setting partners, Jason Bay and Marcus Chan. We meet every quarter.
No
Talk about our
way.
goals and stuff. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And I love goal setting. I've been a passionate goal setter for a really long time. Every quarter I set goals. I have a whole exercise that I do. And I didn't this year. And maybe that's because my goal is just to appreciate the present a bit more. But I'm trying to experience what I already have and not constantly strive to get something more. Doesn't mean I don't think goal setting is a useful practice. I definitely do, and I will do it again. It's just I haven't gone a quarter without setting goals in a very long time. So I'm trying to kind of experiment without it. That being said, what visions do I have? I'm trying to do a lot more speaking. So I do a lot of keynote speaking. So I think I did 4 or 5 last year. I probably have 4 or 5 scheduled for this year. So my goal is to do a lot more of that.
Man, well, just the way you came alive in this conversation, I'd be on the edge of my seat in one of your talks. So we'll have to follow up on that. And I know that's just so cool. You're friends with in setting goals with Marcus Chan and Jason. I noticed Jason, when I had him on not too long ago, mentioned he's doing jujitsu now.
Oh, was he?
Talk about that.
No, that's fun.
Yeah. So, but anyways, and the final question is just if you have any calls to action to the audience? I mean, you already did offer some great ones, like getting out there and trying that exercise to talk to strangers and get their impressions. But any other final words of inspiration or calls to action to the audience, aside from guys checking out Kyle on LinkedIn, following his stuff, checking out Vouris, and sharing him for potential speaking gigs and founders trying to grow their business? So any calls to action, Kyle?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to my woo-woo stuff and just leave people with the suggestion to really explore internally a bit. I lived way too long of my life not really liking myself, and that causes deeper problems than beyond what is just obvious, right? Because I think a lot of that battle happens internally, but it manifests externally, but you don't see that they're connected until one day you do. So I would encourage people to sit with themselves a little bit more and really do some self-discovery and learn to accept who you are and become passionate about sharing that with others.
Kyle, thank you so much for sharing yourself with us. And guys, that's the call to action. You hear it. Maybe this year isn't so much about chasing external things, but turning inward and sitting with ourselves and really getting to know and love ourselves. So Kyle, you're the man. You're a beast. This was an amazing conversation. I'm going to re-watch. I took notes now, and I'm going to take more notes in the future. And Bella, my puppy, loved it too. Guys, thank you for showing it up to your success in tech sales and in life. Happy selling and happy living. And we'll see you in the next one. Thanks so much, Kyle.
Thank you.
All right.